Game week has arrived. That means it's time to dive into some Florida State talk right here on Tide Talk Live. What is up, everybody? Welcome into Tide Talk Live, powered by the Believe Network. Stacey Blackwood here as we begin our game week prep for the Florida State Seminoles. Today, we're going to be looking at 5 facts that Alabama fans need to know about this Florida State team. They are one of the most interesting teams going into the season, and I can't wait to kind of talk about them. And we'll obviously have a game preview later this week, but wanted to get this episode out to talk about some interesting facts about this Florida State team as Alabama prepares for the first game of the 2025 college football season. But before we dive too deep, please make sure you do like, share, and subscribe here on YouTube. We're closing in on 3,000 subs. Help us reach that goal before kickoff on Saturday in Tallahassee. Also, powered by Believe Network makes us free and available wherever you find your podcast. So make sure you subscribe, download, and leave us those 5-star written reviews wherever you find your podcast, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music. We are available wherever your podcasts are found. So, Florida State, one of the most interesting teams really heading into this entire season. A couple years removed from an undefeated regular season, missing out on the playoff in a controversial fashion because they lost their starting quarterback, and Alabama gets in over Florida State because of that. And so there's a little bit of a tie in there. But then they followed that season up with a 2-10 record, and it's kind of put Coach Norvell on the hot seat. He's brought in a influx of portal players, which we will talk about here in just a minute. He's brought in new coordinators, and it's just an entirely different looking Florida State roster and team than it was last season. And we're going to kind of dive into some of the facts about that and look at that. So they're looking to bounce back after a very disappointing season last year. And here are 5 facts that I think Alabama fans need to know before they kick off against the Seminoles on Saturday afternoon. So first, we have quarterback Tommy Castellanos, and of course, he made headlines this summer, talking trash about Alabama a little bit and talking about how they no longer have Nick Saban and to save them, and doesn't believe Alabama's the Alabama of old. And so he's really confident in his abilities. He's really confident in his Florida State teammates, and that is obviously going to be an interesting matchup to watch what he brings to the table, because you're looking at a guy who was a couple years removed from being the first Boston College player to eclipse 2,000 passing yards and 1,000 rushing yards in the same season. And now that you kind of pair him with Gus Malzahn as the offensive coordinator, it feels like this is kind of a guy who's tailor-made for that system. And so Tommy Castellanos could be a really, really good addition to this Florida State offense. And it's going to be interesting to see how explosive he can be and how much he can consistently move the first down marker for this Florida State offense, because Tommy is much like Gus's career, where it's been a little bit up and down, a little bit inconsistent. So we'll see what the marriage between Tommy Castellanos and Gus Malzahn is like in week 1 against the Crimson Tide. But he's a very good athletic player, can make plays with his arm, can make plays with his feet, and he's not a guy that Alabama fans should be sleeping on heading into this matchup. Number 2, wide receiver Duce Robinson. If that name rings a bell, it should. He was a very highly touted recruit coming out of high school, committed to USC. Just a huge guy at 6'6", over 220, a massive target for Tommy in the passing game. Can create a lot of matchup problems, especially when you get down to the red zone. And, he doesn't really have the traits of what I would call a true number 1 receiver, but with his combination of size and athleticism, it does make him a potential breakout weapon in this offense. And I imagine that Coach Malzahn and Tommy Castellanos are going to make a concentrated effort to get Duce Robinson the ball because of his ability to win in those red zone matchups, because of his great size and athleticism. So he's kind of a guy to keep your eye on going into this matchup in terms of an offensive player outside of the quarterback position if you're Kane Womack in this Alabama defense, because he is a mismatch nightmare at 6'6" and over 220 pounds. So Duce Robinson is definitely a name to look out for, the transfer from USC. And speaking of transfers, this is fact 3 that Alabama fans it's going to blow your mind, really. Florida State is basically rolling out a completely new team. An incredible 13 of their projected starters here in 2025 are first year transfer additions. That is just crazy. That includes Castellanos, Duce Robinson, former Tennessee wide receiver, and I believe Alabama native Squirrel White is also a part of this team. Then you have guys like defensive standout and pass rusher James Williams, linebacker Elijah Herring. There are so many transfer portal additions to this team. Like I said, a projected 13 starters for Florida State are first year transfer players. I want to say like 4 of the 5 offensive linemen are first year players, transfers to this Florida State program. So Coach Mike Norvell did not take the 2-10 season lightly. He realized the lack of talent that he had on his roster, and so he made a big splash in the transfer portal, had one of the top transfer portal classes in the entire country, and that makes sense seeing that he has a projected 13 of 22 starters are potentially first-year transfer players. Now, that could work in one or two different ways, or it could be a mix of the two. One way you could look at it is, wow, they've really upgraded the talent. They're going to be a much improved team. Or going into week one with all the new starters in place, are they really going to have that cohesion? Are they going to be a group that has great camaraderie? What does that look like in week one against Alabama with so many new starters on the field for the Florida State Seminoles? So that's one thing I'm kind of looking at going into this matchup. And I think once the season progresses, you're going to see the two kind of combine and you're going to see a more consistent effort. But week one against Alabama is really all that matters for Alabama fans. And it's going to be interesting to see what kind of cohesion this Florida State team has because of all the new players via the transfer portal. Then number 4, this is going to be interesting for Alabama fans as well. They have 2 brand new coordinators there in Tallahassee, and they're high profile guys. On offense, it's Gus Malzahn, the former Auburn and Central Florida head coach. He brings his up tempo, run heavy, spread attack. Loves to do smoke and mirrors and throw you off with motion and wild formations. And I'm sure you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see a lot of design quarterback run. And Gus is going to pull out all the stops against Alabama because of his time at Auburn. He probably has some built up hatred for the Crimson Tide, and he's going to do everything he can to keep Kane Womack on his heels in that Alabama defense. So Gus Malzahn will be calling plays for the Florida State Seminoles. And like I mentioned earlier, he seems like a really good fit for their quarterback, Tommy Castellanos. So interesting matchup there. Then on defense, Tony White arrives from Nebraska, and he's going to be bringing a completely new defensive scheme to this Florida State defense. He's running that 3-3-5 system, which kind of emphasizes speed and versatility and formation variances. So that's going to be interesting because of all the new starters. Not only is it new starters, and it's going to be a new system. So once again, how is that cohesion? What does that look like? Are they comfortable in this new system? Are they comfortable with their teammates? This is a really interesting factor in this matchup to me. Tony White obviously had Nebraska playing pretty good defense up there in Lincoln. And I believe by the time the season is getting close to wrapping up, this Florida State team will be playing better defense, much like Alabama did last year under Kane Womack, where he's bringing in a new system with a lot of new players. And it took several weeks to kind of get their feet wet and get comfortable in it. I could see the same happening here with Tony White and this Florida State defense. So 2 brand new coordinators, 2 big names really, in Gus Malzahn and Tony White. Going to be a lot of fun to see what each of those coordinators bring to the table against the Crimson Tide and how they kind of attack Alabama both offensively and defensively. And then finally, number 5, there are a couple of former Alabama players to watch in this matchup if you're an Alabama fan. And they're going to be familiar names. Of course, Rodell Williams and Earl Little Jr. They transferred to Florida State before the start of the 2024 season. Rodell Williams is expected to be the starting running back for Florida State. We know how tough he runs. We know how hard he runs. We know that he's capable of making plays in the running game. So going to be interesting to see how he plays against his former teammates there. Then, of course, Earl Little Jr. is a guy who created a lot of buzz in his short time in Tuscaloosa, especially in spring ball, making some plays in the spring game a couple years ago. Never really got a chance to put it on tape in regular season action, but transfers to Florida State. He's a more experienced player now, and he's going to have a starting role in that secondary, and he's going to help give the Noles some athleticism and playmaking ability in the back end of that Tony Watt defense. So that's going to be interesting. And their presence in the starting lineup for Florida State really just brings more intrigue to this matchup against the Crimson Tide on Saturday afternoon. But so there you have it. There's 5 facts about the Florida State Seminoles as they kind of get ready for the start of the 2025 season. Castellanos at quarterback is going to be a lot of fun to watch, see how he plays against the Crimson Tide defense. Can he back up all the talk he's had this summer, or does the Alabama defense come in and kind of have their way and kind of flex their muscles on a new starting quarterback and a new offensive coordinator there in Tallahassee? What does it look like with the Tony Watt defense? How does he attack brand new Alabama quarterback Ty Simpson? Can the Alabama running game get going against that versatile 3-3-5 look there that Tony Watt will be bringing to the Florida State defense? So a lot to be excited about. There's going to be a lot of interesting things to happen throughout the week leading up to kickoff. Jake and myself will be back later this week for our full game preview and prediction show. So make sure you do like, share, and subscribe. Jump in the comment section once again. Give us your thoughts on the Florida State Seminole matchup. What intrigues you most? What of the 5 facts that I laid out today intrigues you the most? Is it the quarterback position? Is it the new coordinators? Is it all the transfer portal additions that are now starters, 13 of the 22? Is it just the entire the what happened a couple years ago where Alabama beats out Florida State for that final playoff spot, which caused a lot of controversy? So just a lot of interesting kind of nuances to this matchup that's going to be taking place on Saturday afternoon in Tallahassee, and I cannot wait for it. It's going to be a lot of fun, this is a great way to get the college football season started. What a helmet game, if you think about it, between the Alabama helmet, the Florida State helmet. This is what college football is all about. The SEC is now moving to a 9-game conference schedule. They're going to make each SEC team play a Power Four opponent, at least one in the non-conference every single year. So matchups like this is what makes college football great. You see Alabama already doing this with the home and away series with Florida State, with Wisconsin. They got Ohio State and Notre Dame coming up as well, Georgia Tech, West Virginia, Oklahoma State. There are so many great non-conference matchups that are coming up for Alabama, and Florida State is a great way to kick off the 2025 season. I know they're coming off a down year. They're going to be much improved. In fact, they could be one of the most improved teams, not only in the ACC, but in the entire country. They still have dudes. Now, it may take them a few weeks to build that camaraderie and become, a cohesive unit because of all the transfer portal additions and because they're bringing in both a new offensive system with Gus Malzahn and a new defensive system with Tony Watt. But I think this team has a chance to be much improved from last year. But a lot of that is going to depend on quarterback play, as it does for every other team in the country. So really excited to see this matchup on Saturday. Can't wait for Jake and myself to sit down and preview this matchup, give our score predictions, and obviously we can't wait to hear from you guys in the comment section below and what your thoughts are on this matchup. But that's going to wrap it up, guys. Thank you much. Thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, please smash that subscribe button. Help us reach that goal of 3,000 subs before Saturday's kickoff. I think we're less than 30 subs away. So no reason we can't get there with all the support of the Alabama faithful. So we appreciate that. And we are powered by Believe Network. So if you listen to us in podcast platform, thank the Believe Network there. Do that by going and subscribing, downloading, and leave us those 5-star written reviews. All right, guys, we'll see you here in just a couple days for our full preview and prediction show. But until then, roll tide.